After the release of Eminem's latest album, The Death of Slim Shady, there were many voices on the internet saying that the album contains a hidden message. According to some fans, if you listen to the album in reverse, it presents a completely different story, in which it is Shady who ultimately emerges victorious from the skirmish. In this video, we'll take a look at this theory and try to conclusively settle whether it's correct, so make sure you stick around until the end to find out. Let's start with the fact that just before the album's release, Eminem published a post on his social media saying that The Death of Slim Shady is a concept album, so it should be taken as a whole and listened to in the right order so that the individual tracks make sense. There would be nothing surprising about this if it were not for the fact that some people began to find more to it than is apparent at first glance, which led to the theory that the album should be listened to from the last number to the first. According to this theory, the album would open with the song Somebody Save Me. Listeners are guessing that this final song, if listened to first, is actually foreshadowing Eminem's death. After this, we get the skit Guess Who's Back, in which admittedly only the character Ken Kniff appears, but Ken was always present where Slim was, starting with the Slim Shady LP, and the very phrase used as a title is also associated with the character Shady. It is also very interesting that the skit ends with the sound of footsteps, and the next track according to the reverse track list is Toby, which begins with the sound of footsteps. A strange coincidence, isn't it? In Toby, Eminem acknowledges himself as the greatest rapper of all time who inspired others and raps the following line at the end of his stanza: "Way beyond crazy, Shady gone, but hey, maybe I am the GOAT." However, in the video for this song, the very moment these words are spoken, it is Shady in a Jason mask murdering Eminem. What's more, Eminem mentions in the song that when things don't work out, Shady's shadow appears. After Toby, we have Bad One. According to some, it is Shady who is mentioned here as the bad one, and the fact that he is the one who made Marshall win platinum and diamond records. In addition, some interesting lines are said here. One minute you're here, next minute you're gone. Don't sit there and scoff, lil' bitch. You can knock the shit about me being immature off. It isn't my fault. The liquor is often twisting my thoughts. And a moment later, so who died and made you God? It all sounds like words spoken by Shady, who, if you listen to the album from the beginning, should be dead at this stage of the album. Meanwhile, listening to it in reverse order, it may herald his reappearance. As we know, Marshall has been sober for many years, so it wouldn't make sense for him to rap that the liquor is often twisting his thoughts. Also, Marshall has called himself the god of rap, and it seems that Shady is once again suggesting that this was solely to his credit. This number may therefore indicate Slim's awakening and suggest his return. Next we get Temporary. Eminem begins with, "A lot of people ask me, am I afraid of death?" which is obviously a reference to classic tracks like Still Don't Give a Fuck, Criminal, and Underground. It is a very emotional track addressed to Haley, in which Marshall writes down the words he would like to pass on to her after his death. Why was such a personal song included on this album in the first place? According to reverse theory, Shady is about to kill Marshall, so this is the last moment for him to give such words to his daughter. The next one is Head Honcho. Here, Eminem raps, "But America, I could see the fear in your eyes. You saw my terrible side, the blonde hair and blue eyes. Now the writing is on the wall like graffiti still." This may mean that some things are destined and will not change. Graffiti, being permanent on a wall, will probably remain forever. Does this mean that Shady will as well? Interestingly, in this song, Eminem disses MGK again. This is significant because in Guilty Conscious 2, he theoretically ends all his beefs, including the one with Machine Gun Kelly. However, it makes sense when listening to the album in reverse order, for the reason that Head Honcho then precedes Guilty Conscious 2 and the words about ending the beefs. And then we come to the just mentioned Guilty Conscious 2, which is probably the most important number on the album in terms of concept. No matter which way of listening we choose, front to back or back to front, Guilty Conscious 2 is always a turning point in the whole story. It is here that we hear the voice of old Slim Shady for the first time or the last time, depending on which order we listen to the album. There is, of course, a stormy dialogue between Eminem and Shady, which ends with a gunshot. Then Marshall wakes up, calls Paul, and tells him his dream, after which we hear laughter. In my opinion, this laughter is crucial because it indicates that Shady is alive. On the other hand, however, it's Marshall who calls Paul, so it also can't be that at that moment Shady shot Marshall. All this, in my opinion, suggests that their dialogue and the gunshot were just a dream. Next is the breaking news skit, in which Shady shows Marshall what destruction he has done and viciously laughs at the end. Then we get the track Houdini, the first single from the album. So far, listening to the album backwards, we've received indications that Shady is still alive and getting ready to return. In this number, he returns in earnest. Also important is what happens in the video for this song. Eminem and Shady appear side by side, eventually creating a new character that is a combination of the two. At the end, Shady drives off in a car, causing a lot of destruction, which is important in the context of this theory, since the next tracks are Road Rage and Fuel. In Road Rage, we get just such a version of the rapper, which seems to be a combination of his two identities. Even their voices are intertwined. In Fuel, we don't hear Shady's voice, but Marshall's stanza is full of uncompromisingness and may bring to mind his older style. It can therefore be interpreted to mean that it is Shady spits verses using Marshall's voice. Next up is Antichrist, which seems to be a highlight in terms of blurring the line between the two identities, namely Marshall and Eminem. We hear their voices intertwining with each other, both rap uncompromisingly touching on controversial topics. Interestingly, it even gets to the point where Shady's voice refers to himself as Marshall, while Marshall's voice calls himself Shady. Eminem also raps "Got nightmares, goin' Freddy on me." There's also the sound of an alarm clock, which we've only heard so far at the end of Guilty Conscious 2, Freddy Krueger killed in sleep. So is this a reference to Guilty Conscious 2 and confirmation that the killing was a dream? This track also includes such words as "Cobain put the gauge to his brain, I'm going out with a bang," somehow suggesting that it's all going on in Marshall's head, and one of the two will have to kill the other. Antichrist ends with the words, "I'm here to do what Dre sent me to do. That's sinfully get to spitting this shit. Devil in me and I do his bidding. His name is Marshall." The next track is Lucifer, which begins with Shady saying it feels so good to be back. Did you notice that later Marshall and Shady sort of discuss who should start rapping first? This number is full of controversial topics, and you can tell that the fusion between the two identities is progressing more and more. Let's also pay attention to the song titles themselves. Worse Than Antichrist can probably only be Lucifer himself. Then we move on to the All You Got skit. Here Marshall sort of backs off in a way and asks Shady why he's doing this. Shady again brings up the point he made earlier in the album, which is that he reproaches Marshall for doing all this and coming back for what he deserves. If you listen closely to the skit, you can also hear Shady typing something on the keyboard, and you can also hear Twitter notifications. Does this mean that the public service announcement post was published by Shady and he was thus suggesting that the album should be listened to from the end, as this is the correct order? The track Evil is full of the darkness characteristic of Shady. More significant, however, are perhaps the words spoken in Slim's voice. "Guess I just choose to stay," and then Marshall adds evil. And what better way to show how evil you are than to release a song in its entirety mocking a deceased person who suffered a disability before he died? That's exactly what Brand New Dance is. Here, however, I would like to point out that Shady mentions this song earlier in Guilty Conscious 2, which somewhat disrupts the consistency of the theory we are discussing. Brand New Dance ends with another wake-up call, and we get Trouble, which is a short track drenched in controversy. Here we get Shady in his peak form. Shady also asks Marshall here if he thought he was dreaming, which once again ties in interestingly with the ending of the previous song. In Trouble, Shady makes Marshall drink something. Perhaps this is the poison with which he will kill him. Next is Habits, where Slim pushes a pill into Marshall's mouth, which in a sense also may lead to his death, both literally and metaphorically. As we know, Marshall has been sober for many years, and Slim arose when M was using various stimulants. Marshall's intoxication could therefore mean killing that identity. All this leads us to the Renaissance track, in which we only get Shady in pure form, without Marshall's involvement. According to reverse theory, it was Slim who buried Marshall and spits on his grave, after which he presents his first track without Marshall to the world. For this reason, many people are expecting side B of this album, which would already be fully Shady's album. Personally, I think this reverse theory makes a lot of sense, and by listening to the album, you actually get to know a completely different story. However, it seems to me that there are several ambiguities and gaps in this theory that are not very justifiable. For example, in the track Guilty Conscious 2, Shady dissolves Marshall. A few tracks later, Marshall is tied up, and in the track Habits, Shady ties him up. Listening to the album in the normal order, this all seems to make perfect sense. In the other direction, not necessarily anymore. Paul reacting so aggressively to Marshall's phone call in Guilty Conscious 2 doesn't make much sense either, since we still haven't heard anything particularly controversial at this point. Well, unless we're getting some sort of foreshadowing of the story's continuation during that conversation. I think it's also worth looking at the Shady vs. Marshall face-off published by Complex in the context of this theory. There, Marshall and Shady discuss with each other, and at the end come to the conclusion that together they created Eminem and are one. Other than that, I think the whole conversation was meant for Marshall to give us his point of view on the Slim character. It's hard for me to imagine that a mature man, realizing that he created this character in order to deal with his problems and stir up as much controversy as possible among teenagers, would now decide to put his mature face to death and completely devote himself to creating in the old style. I think the very purpose of this album was to give fans some joy in bringing back the character of Shady and to show what this character would look like in the modern world, while at the same time presenting his approach to this character and the path Marshall would like to take now, as the tracks on the album after Killing Shady and Guilty Conscious 2 may show us. I think you also have to take into account that it is easier to find the story when listening backwards to a concept album, which by default creates a coherent story. However, some things are really interesting to connect and definitely give you food for thought. And what do you guys think about this theory? Do you prefer to listen to the album from beginning to end or from end to beginning? And did you notice anything I didn't mention in this video? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video and don't want to miss out on more Eminem related content, show some love by leaving a like and a subscription. Until next time, peace.